the time. So for this debate, we are the government, and we would allow. We believe that allowing first-time offenders to, with the consent of the victim, pay compensation to the victim in place of a prison sentence is rather important and will have some serious impacts. So to declare the terms. Okay, first-time offenders. This needs no specific explanation. Those that have done their first crime, and for which crimes do we believe that this is important? For the crimes against people, and not with the exception of the homicide, because in this place the victim is not available to give their consent. So with this exception, we believe that for all the other crimes against people, let's say theft or other crimes against people, this should be the measure to be in place. And regarding the consent of the victim, this consent will be regarding the compensation, their will to take compensation, and then the compensation, the amount of the money which should be given to the victim will be adjudicated by the judge. So what happens today? Today, when someone goes on to do their first crime, this will occur for them to enter the jail. And why is this a problem? This is a problem for two reasons. First, because this is a pause, in the best case, for their social life, their social, professional, or every other life. And second, and most importantly, because this makes the offenders to enter a crime cycle, because in the jail they will communicate with other criminals, and this will makes them leave the jail in a psyche that will be more criminalized as it was before entering the jail. So we opt to prefer for the offender to have a penalty, because the compensation, the money compensation, is nonetheless, but not in the mean of a prison sentence. So in my speech, I will explain why this will have a serious impact for the crime, the criminal, and the society. And my team player will explain why this will have also some serious impacts regarding the victim. So, in principle, the money compensation is neither less than a sentence regarding the penalizing effect, because the offender loses something which is rather important, their money, as is the case with their liberty. So when you have to give your money away because you have done an offense, you understand that the crime you have done is something you should not have done, and this reaches the penalizing effect we want for the prison sentence to reach, and the reasons we opt for the prison sentence as a society. But going in the society have all the harms I have explained before, and let me make them clear and elaborate a little. So when they end their social, the criminals end their social lives, they don't have the opportunity to continue with all the factors that will make to them easy to be in the society again, and they have an incentive to be in to make some offenses more in order to be in the jail again and have to eat or things like them, because this is something important. They do not have any money left or jobs to for them to live properly, and you know, and when they enter the crime cycle, they know how to achieve those goals better, and uh, to be better in doing any offense. And also they have the opportunity to know people that have that are worst offenders, and join gangs or anything else, which will make to them easier to let's say level their criminal game. So when the compensation is in place, these all these harms may not happen, will will not happen, and also the compensation will be something that um, is an incentive for the criminals to not make other crimes and not be in the criminal sector of the society, let's say. So when something more. And something to be clear, it's that the first time that they will commit a crime, the compensation will be placed. And in the second, if the society and the judge and everyone understands that the compensation has not achieved its goal, which is the, let's say, uncriminalization of the criminal, there will be the prison sentence in place to, continue uh, their goal with their goals and so on and so forth. So for all these reasons, please vote OG. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. And for the next speech, I'd like to call upon the leader of opposition. You have 7 minutes as well.
In opening opposition, we believe that justice is the most important thing that we should get out of our justice system. The fact that people who have committed offenses against other people, who have made their life miserable, who have wrongfully done actions against them, they are the ones that should be, they should get justice for them. Only on our side you get that, on their side you don't. 2 points in my speech. First of all, what is justice and why do we need to send them to jail? And secondly, how they can illegitimately apply pressure on victims to take the money, even though the victims do not want to, and therefore we do not get justice. But first of all, one extraneous point to everybody. Opening governments tell us that if we put those offenders into prison, that they're going to get into a cycle because there are other offenders in prison and they're going to learn from them and then join their gangs and whatnot. Well, one response. Basically, we tell you that prisons generally have a pretty good and comprehensive rehabilitation programs, right? Programs that teach you how to what you were doing wrong, and all of those incentives to show remorse, to get your sentence shortened, and to get your life better. You get rewarded for good behavior and all of that kind of stuff. So generally, people do get better in prison and not worse because of all of these programs. Obviously, the people who run these the prisons are kind of aware of all of these problems, which they are likely to apply measures to rehabilitate all the prisoners who are in there. So what is justice? Basically, fundamentally, justice is when you are done something wrong against you, you can basically claim the same amount of harm back from that person. Well, when somebody has been abusing you for years, or somebody sexually assaulting you or raping you, and taking basically your basic freedom and your ability to assert yourself as a human, you have the right to claim the same thing from the other person, basically take their liberty in return, And we do that in trials, and which is why we put people in prison. Specifically, when if you give someone money, or even though they might want it, it's certainly not justice, because no amount of money is worth the suffering and the crime that was inflicted on you. But they will tell us, oh, but it's the victim's choice, so yeah, so that's fine. We tell you it would be fine if it was the victim's choice, but in a lot of instances, and the most important instances, it's not a victim choice because of illegitimate pressures, which is my second point, and we'll see how this works specifically, which is why the victim cannot choose in those instances. So basically, how does it work? We tell you that the most important population that we're talking about, in this case, where that the policy is most relevant to them, is the population that's actually going to agree to this policy, is the population that have a special connection perhaps with the perpetrator, the population that is very susceptible to his influence, and is going to be to agree to that compensation, even though they don't really want to. Who are we talking about? In a lot of cases, for instance, let's say about family sex offender. For instance, people who or family abuser, people in your family. It could be it could actually be one of your siblings, your father, or your uncle, or all of these things that could have been abusing you in your childhood, could have been abusing you as an adult, could have been abusing you in all sorts of instances. These are people that you actually have, as deformed as it might sound. These are people you also have sort of like a relationship with, people who have influence over you, and people you have sort of mixed feelings of them, because you have been abused and you might not even know this. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is that these people can apply basically a lot of pressure on you, because you're actually scared of them, right? If you lived with your father and he's been sexually abusing you all of these years, then you have a lot of fear for the man, and you don't actually know what he can or cannot do, can or cannot do to you. Even if you are even if like the police already took him away and you know that he can't get you, you always have these nightmares about him, and you think you might be able to get you and all of these kinds of stuff. Secondly, we tell you that these people actually might have actually sort of like mixed and wrong feelings about them, which allows them basic, and also receive pressure from other family members to pressure them into taking this deal. We think this is horrible. What's the comparative? Because in the status quo currently, you have no ability to hold a trial, right? Once you go to the police, or once somebody goes to the police for you and informs them of wrongdoing, then the police can go and investigate, and the police, no thank you, the police can go and investigate and take that person to jail, whether or not you agree or disagree, and give you that justice that you deserve. But crucially, here it is, we are much less able to do so. Before I continue, I'd love to get an extension from closing. Opening.
Oh, the pressure happens on them, on the victims, even if the penalty will be the prison sentence. Why is this?
Look, in the status quo, the victim has no choice to continue the trial or not. The trial is in the hand of the government, right? This is a criminal trial. Criminal trials are not prosecuted by the victim, but are prosecuted by the state, and the state has a specific right on what to do with the trial and which charges to press, what to investigate, and if they want to put it in prison or not. At the point where you allow the victim to make that choice, is the point where you get illegitimacy in the trial. You get not, you do not get justice for the victim. You do not get justice and the proper compensation that the perpetrator deserves, and all of this kind of and because you let the victim make the choice. Why is this so harmful, and why, even if the victim deteriorates, like OG says, we win this debate? Well, a couple of well, basically, um, Basically, the reason is because we prefer the victim. We prefer the victim to have all his rights. We do not prefer the perpetrator. Once the perpetrator has committed an offense, he deserves punishment, and even if obviously he would be better outside, it's not something we should really take into consideration here. First of all, the justice and the victim, and for all these reasons, please oppose.
Thank you for your speech. And for the next speech, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. You have 7 minutes as well.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Can I be given? I won't be able to use camera, so I hope it is okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Just a second, and I will begin to set up my timer. Okay, so I will begin my speech by wanting to make a little bit of a rebuttal to what was heard from the member of the opposing front. So an interesting opinion that I heard is that they want to put justice for the victim in the forefront. That's why we believe that what we are suggesting is better in also giving the justice for the victim. Let me then contemplate on that. First, we can argue that justice is subjective to everyone and anyone, and justice has many manifestations. So, justice for someone would be to get more money for what wrong was done to him, and not particularly see someone sentenced to jail, especially if we're not talking about extreme cases like family abuse or sex offenders, but some minor cases like minor thefts and so on. Having said that, I would like to backtrack a little and talk about also what was heard to be that no amount of money is worth the suffering. And as we will point out, and as I think is pointed in a serious tone, is not the case in each and every one. Case where it is up to the victim to decide how much his suffering is worth. Okay, and a minor thing that was said is the whole process of going through a trial, and we believe that from the moment that you choose to lead someone to the court of law, even if it is by stating the wrong that was done to you to a police officer or the criminal justice or the criminal mechanism, you are somehow seeing to that this person is led in front of a court, in front of a judicial system, and thus wanting to be compensated for that, either by feeling the ethical compensation of seeing him being accused and in the end ending up on jail, or by choosing to the leeway of monetary compensation, which is for some cases, as I'm going to talk about, maybe the best solution. So let's talk about the victim and why it is preferable for the majority of cases for the victim to ask for a monetary compensation instead of seeing someone be led to the court of justice. So in the top let's say, of the reasons is that the justice systems in each and every country, in each and every county, in some bigger countries, might have differences and might not have a perfect judiciary system. That means that they might have implemented rules and judgments that are maybe over the top a little bit, or have penalizations that are a little bit too harsh. So by choosing the judicial way, you might see people being convicted for something that is not so bad, just because the system has elected to face it away, especially concerning that nations are a bit, and judicial systems are affected by the socio-economical situation. So, for example, in a certain point of time, a country might choose to penalize scammers, for example, in cases where the economy is suffering more harshly than it would be in periods of time where the economy is a bit more flourishing. So we say that it's also a dependent thing, and it can have fluctuations. So it is not for most of the for many times not the best solution to what it is. It is that we are willing to achieve. And what is that? It's justice. So justice has, of course, some ethical background and many theories surrounding it, but we believe that it's also has a utilitarian outlook, meaning that sometimes justice should also not stick to the theoretical level, but also have pragmatical manifestations. So if a victim is able to choose if he wants if he or she wants to be compensated for the wrong that has been done towards him, rather than just see a person being overly accused, or sometimes not judged that harshly as he was, as they were expecting. So, for example, if if the judicial system gives them pathways to evade more harsh penalization, then there will be no actual justice. So no justice in the theoretical level that the opposing front has suggested, but also no justice for the person itself, where he will see that he's being wrong, they will see that they're being wrong, and there will be a minimal sentence for that. So in sometimes, and I believe in most cases, if I may say so, monetary compensation or any compensation can be more have more effect than a penal sentence. So we believe that in these cases the victim would be far better off by choosing to ask for a compensation, and not wanting to see someone lead to a trial. And of course, factoring in the psychological factor, which can also be important in some cases, as they will see that a long trial can be detrimental to someone's psychology. Thank you. Please support.
Thank you for your speech. For the next speech, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition, you have 7 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. So I will be starting in 3, 2, 1, and so 2 main points in my speech: how we're even when we're just by making or giving the victim the choice, we're making his life miserable, and how we're dealing with cases with multiple victims, which is we'll explain what type of offenses and what type of crimes are we talking about here, why they are quite common, and how there is unjustified to give just the one that's being on court. But first, okay, so let's start and how it in itself it's illegitimate to put the victim in this case. Let's say what the victim here is, what situation is the victim in. He's kind of a storm of emotions because someone broke into his house and took some of the valuable things that he has them, which not only has some of emotional feeling, but also have some money put in them for and some harassment cases or other type of cases like this crime. He's fundamentally hurt from what the offender do. He is feeling emotionally terrible from the fact that this even happened. It happened to him, but someone who probably has a close relationship to him. So he's in a full storm of emotion in here. And what we are having at the end of the trial, that the victim sees justice is done. There is a judge. He's seen his case. He said, okay, we have been proven this offender has made a crime and deserves punishment. And now what we are putting in front of him, we are putting in front of him some kind of choice to lower the punishment given to his offender. And let's note that most of the people want to be moral. They want to have empathy for other people. They want to be able to judge and to see and to look for what other people feel. And when we are giving him this choice, he sees that as a kind of expectation from society to weigh down his suffering and are there any things that might have to lowering the victim's punishment, to the offender's punishment, and judge them wisely and choose whether it is for him considerable to lower this kind of a punishment. I think this is horrible at itself because let's note what I'm here. I'm in a dilemma. I've suffered probably a lot, and right now I'm kind of being expected to weigh down the much of the suffering that I have experienced from forehand, from first person, to what you look forward to the offenders and some cases and some reasons why I want to lower this kind of punishment and not put him in jail. For example, if he's coming from a hard background and or is kind of poor, we might want to judge it. But I'm in a storm of emotions, and I actually have and I really hurt in this, and I really don't know what is the kind of how do I weigh down my suffering and what other has the offenders to his right, let's say. And let's watch how in every decision I will make, I'll feel miserable. If I'll decide to release him, I literally decide to release him, I actually hurt in my mind. I'm hurting justice because that's what the judges decide. Furthermore, I kind of hurt the fact that I have been offended myself. I kind of agree conceptually that this is not that severe to put this man on prison, that there are specific justifications to what he has done. This is horrible because I am so offended here and looking forward to see. And therefore, if I'm not going to release him, so first I live my life and think maybe I've been wrong. Maybe he deserves some empathy that I didn't show. And if it's only me that's going to show that, I think that's real. They're going to feel miserable about this thing. And let's talk about the first case when there are more than one victim, because in some cases like sexual harassment, there is the one regularly women that give the complaint and other ones that are kind of behind the stage and do not want to speak up. And we actually and we value that. They have their reasons. But when we are giving the one that has stood up the ability to take this one man and put it out of jail, we're not only making it for, we're not only hurting it specifically, we're hurting everyone around it,
Why?
the whole other victims, and that we can, yes?
So why do you take as a presumption that the compensation is a lower penalty than the prison one?
Note that it is clear why compensation is lower for the victim. The alternative is going on jail, having no liberty, having no way to get money, having no seeing of your family. Being in jail is miserable for most of the people. Even when you are talking about a huge compensation or everything like that, it is uncomparable to the fact that you are living, for example, years of your life in prison and having no liberty, does not see your family, and being around people that you have originally have no idea with and probably does not much connect with. They are criminals, you might don't want to connect them at all. And where there are more than one, as I said, victim, this is a case when we are actually having a direct clash between the victims deciding where, even if we are going to have this compensation or not. I think it is clear by two of this point why we need to oppose this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. And to open the debate on closing tables, I'd like to call upon the member of government. You have 7 minutes.
Okay, in my speech, first I will do characterization of prison system, tackle victims' perspective, and why it is generally better for offender to rehabilitate and overall for society. First of all, when opposition team said that in status quo prisons are good with good rehabilitation, they have psychologists, they can for good behavior might might show remorse towards this offender. We think that it's not completely true. It only happens on some developed countries such as Norway or other Scandinavian countries. Generally, each prison is given that it is like imprisonment, no liberation. There is a psychological pressure, stigma from society when because you are your record there is written that you are a prisoner. It limits opportunity to be like a full member of society, etc. So well, in our case, first-time offender, like he or she have alternative because as we know, when investigation starts happening, when detectives are asking questions, and whole involvement with legal system is already showing the signs that that something difficult is happening, that in that stage of investigation, person already knows that this person done some mistakes, and especially first-time offender, he needs a mercy, maybe a second chance to not repeat it again, and we think that this chance can be fulfilled if victim consents. Therefore, this person might start a new chapter in life around relatives or friends that can help, unlike in prison where we have people who bad people to interact, to have example from, or even total isolation where less interaction is happening in most prisons. Also in these prisons there are strict conditions, and just years of life, especially of young people, is just wasted, while in alternative people have a chance to be productive members of society. Also, when we think that opposition saying that maybe victim can be coerced into it, but we do not think so. We think that in every judicial system we have psychologists or investigators who decide whether a victim has psychological damage, maybe Stockholm syndrome from its abuser, or like ask many questions. And also opposition team said something about, for example, powerful people who can coerce to change mind victim. We think that these cases happen in both sides, but in our side, victim can at least ask for compensation with money, but in their world, victim just retrieves, just says that this person is innocent and just returns the documents that charges offender. Okay, the next thing is we think that victims when opposition team said that it is too much burden for victims to decide, we think that not. It conversely, when victim is really offended by offender, it gives to this person, to victim, a power to decide over whether this person should have a jail time or just compensation. And sometimes in status quo, when victims are we think that victims are rational in their decision, because they our judicial system sometimes cannot measure whether how victim feels, and only victim has ability to decide whether to ask money from this. Maybe victim needs this money for existence, and we think that mechanism is that offender will give money for this victim like twice as much, or with persons. That's all. Yes.
Okay, thank you for your speech. And for the next speech, I'd like to call upon the member of opposition. You have 7 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to do a couple things in this speech. I'm going to talk about how like a policy like this does disproportionately affect poor people in a worse way. You see more of them going to prison, and then in comparison, how this actually allows things like white-collar criminals and richer criminals actually allowed to sort of like pay their way out of crime, and why that's like incredibly bad. Then I'm also going to fill in some of the gaps from our opening in terms of rehabilitation in prisons and why that actually is possible. Cool. Just like a quick bit of framing in terms of like, I think the top half of this debate has had, you know, quite like a potentially nebulous debate on like what justice is and like if it's meaningful or not. I think regardless of if like whatever you think about that, like I think justice is probably only meaningfully materially to people if they feel like it's been done, if they can feel like they've actually been able to move on with their lives and things. And I think that like that does mean that like people are still capable of making bad decisions objectively. For example, like, even if someone really should be going to prison, or if like taking the money isn't maybe the best decision overall, I think I'm going to prove to you why that happens, and why that's actually far worse. Cool. In terms of like how this disproportionately affects poor people, I think in cases where, for example, like civil and criminal crimes overlap, I think at the point that this debate is happening like upon sentencing, settling out of court and things hasn't happened. Either there wasn't a lot of money offered, or there was no ability to do this in the first place, or the victim didn't or wanted it to go to court and really pressed for it to go through. I think that is a thing that happens. And I think this means that the money that you are likely to get, if that is the case, is very small or like not meaningful to you. I think also that like crimes are generally like committed, like at least the crimes we see prosecuted are generally committed by people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, just due to like a vast multitude of reasons of just not having enough money. So maybe they resort to things like theft, but also living in traditionally over-policed areas means that you're more likely to be sentenced. I think these are likely to be poorer people, and again, these are poorer people who are less likely to be able to offer you any meaningful amount of money that you think is going to make you feel like this person has been punished, that makes you feel like justice has been done for you. Because even though because I think it's probably unlikely that we're going to be expecting every victim of a crime to be looking deeply into the financial situation of the person that perpetrated a crime against them, and so like they might not have the same understanding that like a small amount of money actually might be quite significant to someone. I think what that means is that these victims, like if it is a poor person that has perpetuated crime against them, they're probably more likely to not consent to taking the money. They're probably more likely to go down the route of just putting this person in prison for 10 years or whatever, because that is something that they feel like is a really adequate punishment that is done to this person. Also note that there's a lot of crimes, even if we're taking OG, that like murder isn't included in this. I probably think it should be, but like there are other crimes, for example, things like assault, that you do just want to see someone off of the streets and away from your community, and that offers a lot of solace. I think what that means is that in a lot of cases, especially like at the majority of crimes, you are unlikely to get. But why is this like get people actually taking the money? I think why is this so bad? I think that like firstly, like even like once they've been sentenced, like even if we take all of OG like at their best, and like the government as a whole, and I think you'll still have to get the criminal charge at the point that you've been sentenced, even if you're paying compensation. I think that does make it a lot more difficult for people to do things like getting jobs or reintegrating back into society, because there is such a stigma on criminals. Like this motion doesn't stop you being a criminal in the eyes of society. Again, I think that is worse at the point that you are poorer and you are relying on getting like jobs that you might have to apply for. You are not as well connected as like your rich counterparts that would be able to get this job regardless because of who they know. It doesn't matter that they have a criminal record, probably some other people that they know do as well. I think what that means is that you're just more likely to reoffend and go back into a life of crime, and you're less likely to get jobs and get caught into stereotypes and things that lead to things like over-policing of areas, and the cycle repeats itself. Cool. So I think that's why this is like disproportionately going to affect poor people the most. But why, on the flip side, and I actually think this is probably some of the biggest benefits that we can bring in, the biggest harms rather that we can bring in this debate, is that like how the rich are able to sort of pay their way out of crime in a lot of cases. I think often in terms of like white collar, like more organized crimes, you'll see like a sort of sacrificial lamb offered up, like one person from the organization who's been thrown under the bus that's probably a first-time offender and so would qualify for this kind of thing. But they probably still also have like the legal backing and the financial backing of the organization that they were a part of when they're going to court. I think these people are able to offer huge amounts of money that you are like, if you were a victim, you would be crazy not to take upon sentencing. And so you're not going to push for them to actually go to prison. Even if you maybe refuse that money initially, if they tried to like buy your silence or whatever. I think this is again more likely to happen at the point that these companies are able to put you through very long and potentially traumatic trials, if they have good lawyers and things. And you're more likely to just want it to be over with, and you'll just take the money, even if it's a lot, even if that's maybe not the best thing. I think also note that I think also this is not an adequate punishment, as like OG would like you to believe, especially in terms of like being like on the balance, like losing this amount of money versus losing your freedom. I think for these people, money is rarely an object. Money is rarely a big concern. Whereas for like example, like actually having the loss of your liberty is probably a much bigger deterrent from actually doing these crimes. I think this is really important in the case of white collar crime and things, because this is so much more damaging than any sort of small crimes that can be done on an individual level, as these are things like securities fraud are able to cause losses to like hundreds, if not thousands of people at a time, depending on who was like sold false information or like participated in this unwillingly. And yeah, I think what that means is that like them being able to get away with it because like they don't have repeated individuals going into prison all the time. I think that means is that like you have less high profile like prison sentencing. I think for example, having a company paying a lot of money to someone is not as newsbreaking as, oh, CEO of whatever went to prison for fraud. I think what that means is that you have less scrutiny on these companies. You also have like through things like the media, but you also have like less pressure to crack down on this kind of thing. You have less pressure on governments to legislate, to try and regulate these companies more, and to try and stop these things happening in the first place. I think this also leads to worse prison conditions at the point where I've already proved this, if more poor people still go to prison under this motion. And there's less of an incentive, for example, rich people that have a lot of lobbying powers at the point that their own aren't in these prisons, they have less incentives, and they probably would just, it's probably easier for them to ignore the terrible conditions in prisons if there are any. And it, just considering that it is so much easier to sweep exploitation of marginalized groups who, again, like generally are poorer, under the rug, as they're facing discrimination, often seen as less people. They're also not like maybe the most reliable voter base if they're historically disenfranchised. I think you do just see like less likelihood of prisons being good and worse conditions at the point that like there's just less attention on them, because there's generally less attention from media or politically on these kind of marginalized groups that you'll find in prisons more often under this motion. I think also just really quick, actually no, I don't have time to do the rehabilitation stuff, but I think prisons can be good. I think there are things like healthcare and like psychological counselling and things that you can access in prisons. No, also these often cost a lot of money under the status quo, so even if like you can't access, I think often the choice here is being able to not access it at all, or being able to access it in a prison, even in a really basic form. Please oppose.
Thank you for your speech. And to conclude the debate on the government budget, let's call on the government week. You have 7 minutes.
Yeah, sure. 10 seconds, please. I'll just switch on the timer. Okay. Okay. In my speech, I'm going to explain the intention of offenders to not to commit crimes further, and also add some information to my partner's point about why it's going to be better overall for both the victims and for both the offenders. Now some points rebuttal to OO and CO. First of all, OO, they say that it's their argument is based on the fact that could be a pressure for the victims, because this can make their decisions irrational and etc. First of all, we don't understand what this kind of pressure, because this can be a threatened from the victim, or that can be a request from relatives and friends to choose just compensation, not deciding to go to the prison. But if it's just a request to police him and excuse him, we don't understand why it's going to work, because even if it's social pressure, the victim have an anger, and this anger cannot be changed with any, for example, if a relative will say, just please, can you excuse him, and etc. This is not enough, because he has an anger. He understands that he can get compensation and money from it. He can just make the same level of the harm to him and get the benefits from the offender, because alternatively he will not get it. And in my case I will explain why it's not why it's true. And moreover, this is a real rare case, because other people, even if it's relatives or friends, don't want to protect offender. Moreover, if it's gonna be some kind of threat, there are the police workers who can protect you if someone going to kill you, and etc. That is why we think that is a really rare case. Moreover, why we think when our opening opposition say that this is a clear one why compensation is more lower, we don't understand why, because this is the opposition's burden to prove why it's real lower. And now, in my case, I'm going to explain why it's the same harm, because the aim of the prison is to make prisoners take their freedom and isolate them. In our case, we are going to do the same things, because now he will there will be a financial harm to the victim. He can probably he can afford it. In my case, I will explain why is it true. Moreover, police institutions will control him. They will not give him full liberty, because he should compensate the harms. That is why they will control him in order to make sure that he can pay this money, and he do these actions every month and etc. That is why there will be control of them. Other factors that are in prison, it's just in errors such as bad conditions and stereotypes about prisoners, that they will do the crime again in the future after leaving the prison and etc. That is an errors that is not going to work. That is why we think that there is the same level of the harm, because there is a control, there is a financial harm. In the prison there are also a control of the prisoners, and moreover there are financial harms because they are not able to afford the work in the future. Moreover, when they say that there are expectation of way down to punishment, we think that is why we don't understand why is it bad if it makes the victim satisfied, because he decides whether to give him one thing or not. Okay, according to the CO, why we think that this CO case is irrelevant to this debate, because we have to understand that if the offender cannot afford some kind of money to compensate, the victim understands it, and it can harm him more, because if he will not take the compensation, and moreover when the offender is in freedom, that is makes him more angry, because he wants revenge, and this revenge is not accessible for him now, and that is why he understands this. He records his financial affordness and etc. That is why he can assess whether it's a good idea to give him a compensation or not. That is why he will decide it. And if the offender can really afford the compensation, he will just give them to go to the prison, and we think that it's better for him, and that is why we think that it's an irrelevant case. Moreover, even if it's relevant, still offenders can't afford this money, because if they steal this money from the victim, they can give them back with some percentages and etc. If they kill the person, they can build his own purpose, because they wanted to get money, and this money can be given back. That is why we think they can afford this. Okay, according to our case, why we think there is a intention for the victims not to, or for the offenders not to commit any crimes further. We think that is there are strict conditions in prison. There are total isolation that can lead to the social problems and interaction with society and etc. They're not able to get a job and etc. We think that is a problem because it excludes the other alternatives not to make crimes, because they should survive, they should get the money in any way. That is why we think when there are comfortable conditions in freedom, when they give just the compensation to the victim, they have this comfortable conditions. That is why it enables him to only not to cross the borders, not to commit a crime again, because it is harder for him to decide to go to the bad side and in the side of the opposition. They cross the border and have an opportunity to commit a crime again because they have an intention to do this. In our side, they don't have it. And that is why we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. And to conclude the whole debate, I'd like to call upon the opposition whip. You have 7 minutes.
Oh, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hannah brings you a crucial piece of framing that was missing from all other teams in this debate, in what kinds of people are actually affected by taking this kind of deal. Hannah tells you it's more likely that more poor people now go to prison because rich people can just afford to go get away from crimes, especially white-collar crimes, such as embezzlement, fraud, such as in terms of landlords like cheating their tenants and stuff, environmental damage, and all of those things. None of the prop teams give us any analysis as to why poor people will be able to pay this compensation. But like Hannah gives you reasons that they won't, right? They come from poor social economic backgrounds. They probably don't have money saved up because they live from paycheck to paycheck, and they're very less likely to have high enough savings. In response, CG tells us that it's okay, like if they go to prison, we're likely to accept, we accept if they go to prison if they can't pay these things. We think that's a very bad response, right? Hannah tells you why prison conditions get worse for these people when rich people aren't likely to assert their influence to have good conditions for people, and it gets less attention. So yeah, that's just a harm that they bite, and they lose on that. Cool. 2 reasons then why Hannah wins this debate. Firstly, Hannah explains to you why it's better for victims, and secondly, why it's better why it's better for offenders. In terms of victims, what do we get from each of the teams? OG tells us that it's better for victims to get material benefits and that they get closure. But notice how a victim who victims who are making this decision and CG tell us that these victims make these decisions rationally. But notice when a victim is making a decision under duress in court, it's very unlikely to be rational. It's very likely that that decision-making calculus is going to be significantly weighted by their socioeconomic conditions. When victims are willing to make the trade-off between accepting money or justice for their perpetrator, they're only going to make that trade-off when they need the money more than they want justice for themselves. And they're not going to get closure in that place, right? Because once that money is used up, they still know that the person who harmed their family member, who embezzled money from them, or who cheated them, or who assaulted them, is still roaming out on the streets. I see no way in which this would be better for the victims. Even if they get some material compensations, because money runs out. Money runs out at some point. OG also tell us that long trials are detrimental to psychology, but Hannah tells you that this decision happens during the time of sentencing. So the trial has already happened. So that case is irrelevant because like they've already gone through the trial process when that decision has to be made. And like because most of the why Hannah's case is most important here for especially for victims is because rich people can just exert their monetary influence on poorer people and have them and give them the money, and they're less likely to get closure. This is also a crucial piece of framing that we don't get out of our opening. Our opening tells us that this is most likely to be like people who are pressured into taking the payment by family members, and I think that works in certain cases, but it isn't always mutually exclusive because family members can always pressure them even before the time of sentencing, right? I think Hannah's case has the most impact on OP because it affects the most number of people. It's like the most number of poorer people, especially because that's the crucial framing that our opening don't give you. Why does cool? I think we have won the clash of who, of what's better than victims. Why is it better for offenders on side CO? Like OG tell us that like offenders are likely to be better off because like they don't enter a cycle of criminalization in prison. But like because they've given us no analysis as to why poor people don't enter prisons, and CG fully bites the bullet on poor people going to prison, I don't see why like that's important at all, because poor people are still getting into this cycle of the cycle of crime, right? And like CG tell us that rich people, like people can just start a new chapter in their lives around friends and relatives. But notice again how like it's only rich people who are getting away with it. And I'm not sure why it's important for them to start a new chapter in their lives, especially because rich people are probably less guilty about committing white collar crimes anyway, because they have a sense of entitlement and they have a sense of, you know, like profiteering, which has led them to commit that crime in the first place. CG, do you have a POI for me? OG?
So regarding closure, closure will be given due to the fact that there will be a guilty verdict. Why this is not, you know, sustainable in this case?
Cool. If it's a guilty verdict, and if you still see your oppressor, which is the rich person who has embezzled money from you, still going out in the world, still being able to run their business, still roaming around in the streets, still enjoying their lives, I don't think that's closure to you. Because even if they're guilty, they're supposed to pay some sort of something in return to society, as opposed to just money to you, which will run out at some time. Oh, cool. Lastly, like about the issue of rehabilitation, we think even like it's just worse for rehabilitation for richer people, and like rehabilitation for all offenders of crimes happen better in prison, because you're because on the one side, on their comparative, you're just you pay money, which probably doesn't mean a lot to you, especially if you're a rich person, and it doesn't put a dent in your enormous wealth. You're not supposed to take that as a loss, and it's not going to make you think before you commit another crimes. So like recommitting of crimes is very likely under the framing that Hannah has given you in her extension. And like when your literal like liberty is taken away, especially if you're a rich person, this is something you probably value a lot. And once you come out, you're more likely to be rehabilitated, mostly because of the time that you spend in prison. Like CG tell us that you know, prisons don't have psychologists and stuff, but it's still taking away your liberty that's making you think about these things. Like at the end of all of this debate, the harm that does stand is worsening of prison condition, or like another harm that stands is worsening of prison conditions, which Hannah has brought to you, which is really bad. So yeah, oppose.
Thank you for your speech, and thank you all for the debate. I'll be back in around 15 to 20 minutes.